Racist cop mocks black woman at DMV Crumbles when she terminates his badge. The California sun beat down with relentless intensity, turning the asphalt parking lot outside the Department of Motor Vehicles into a shimmering, oppressive oven. The heat bled into the building, mingling with the stale, recirculated air conditioning, creating an atmosphere that felt thick and heavy. Inside, the scene was one of collective, weary resignation. A long, winding line snaked across the linoleum floor, populated by people shuffling their feet, checking their watches, sighing audibly, and clutching worn envelopes filled with paperwork. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow that did nothing to lift the spirits. This was the waiting room of bureaucratic purgatory, a place where time stretched and patience frayed. Amidst this languor, one figure stood out, not for any flamboyant action, but for her sheer stillness and composure. Her name was Naomi Harris, a woman in her early 30s. She wore a tailored black pantsuit that fit impeccably, her posture erect and confident. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, severe bun, highlighting the clean lines of her jaw and the intelligence that shone from her eyes. Those eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the room with a quiet intensity, missing nothing, yet betraying no outward sign of impatience or frustration. In a room full of slumping shoulders and anxious fidgeting, Naomi was an island of calm, a picture of elegant restraint holding a crisp stack of documents neatly aligned in her hand. She stood near the middle of the line, waiting her turn with a dignity that seemed almost out of place in the drab surroundings. The automatic glass doors at the entrance slid open with a whoosh of displaced air, and a new energy, loud and abrasive, entered the room. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, filling out his police uniform almost to bursting. This was Officer Larry Denton, a local patrolman. He moved with an air of entitlement, a swagger that spoke of unquestioned authority. His sunglasses were perched on his nose, reflecting the harsh overhead lights, but the smirk playing on his lips was clearly visible, a permanent fixture of perceived superiority. He didn't join the back of the line. Instead, he strode purposefully alongside it, heading directly towards an open counter. People in the line shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, others offering faint, nervous smiles that went unnoticed or ignored. Larry Denton moved through the room like he owned it, his heavy footsteps echoing slightly. Naomi watched his approach, her expression unchanged. As he reached the counter and seemed poised to step forward, cutting ahead of everyone, she spoke. Her voice was low, clear, and polite, cutting through the general murmur of the room like a fine blade. "Excuse me, officer," she said, just loud enough for him and the people nearby to hear. "You need to take a number and wait in line." Larry stopped dead. The smirk wavered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of mild annoyance, before the smirk returned, wider and more pronounced. He turned slowly to face Naomi, his head tilted slightly. His eyes, hidden behind the dark lenses, felt like they were scanning her, assessing her, specifically noticing the color of her skin, the professional cut of her clothes, the quiet confidence in her stance. The dismissiveness in his posture was immediate and absolute. "Oh," he drawled, his voice suddenly loud, echoing with a theatrical mockery clearly intended for the ears of everyone within earshot. He took a step closer to her, invading her personal space slightly. "You people aren't familiar with how things work, are you? Or maybe you just forgot about waiting your turn because you think you're special." The air in the DMV grew instantly thick with tension. Conversations stopped, Heads turned. Dozens of eyes were now fixed on Naomi and Larry. The collective boredom of the queue vanished, replaced by a charged, uncomfortable silence. Larry seemed to bask in the sudden attention, puffing out his chest slightly. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms, settling in for his performance. He continued, his voice dripping with condescension and thinly veiled racial animus. I bet you're here because you got caught driving without a license? Or maybe you've got some outstanding warrants. Something juicy, right? Had to come down here yourself because you can't send your representative? The implication hung heavy in the air, a deliberate public humiliation targeting her race and assuming a lower social standing, perhaps even a criminal history. His smile widened, a cruel, triumphant slash across his face. It wasn't just rude. It was a calculated act of intimidation and public shaming, designed to put her in her place, to remind everyone watching who held the power in this interaction, in this room, in this society. Naomi did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer a single word in response to his taunts, his accusations, his open contempt. She simply stood there, perfectly still, and met his gaze, or where his gaze would be, behind the sunglasses, with her own. Her eyes, dark and steady, held his with an intensity that was disarming. There was no anger there, no fear, no outward sign of the sting his words must have inflicted. Instead, her look was one of profound calm, an almost unsettling tranquility that seemed to penetrate the flimsy facade of his bravado. It was an analytical gaze, a gaze that seemed to see right through the uniform, the sunglasses, the smirk, directly into the small, insecure core of the man using power to mask his inadequacy and prejudice. Her stillness was a challenge in itself, a refusal to engage on his terms, a quiet defiance that was far more impactful than any shouted retort could have been. The silence stretched, tense and heavy, punctuated only by the persistent, low hum of the air conditioning and the faint, almost imperceptible blink of the security camera positioned high in the corner of the ceiling, a silent, unblinking eye recording the unfolding scene. The people in the line watched, frozen, their discomfort palpable. Some shuffled their feet nervously, others stared straight ahead, pretending not to listen, desperate to disappear. No one stepped forward, no one spoke up. The power dynamics Larry had so eagerly asserted seemed absolute, yet Naomi's quiet presence felt like a growing counterforce, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the picture he was trying to create. The answer began to unfold in the quietest possible way, a stark contrast to the loud, boorish performance Larry Denton had just delivered. While he was still preening in the uncomfortable silence he had created, relishing the discomfort of the crowd and the apparent passivity of his target, Naomi Harris performed a simple action. Her hand, steady and unhurried, went into her black leather clutch bag. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. Her movements were deliberate, precise. From the bag, she withdrew a small, rectangular object. It was made of rigid plastic or perhaps layered card, bearing the official look of identification. Without taking her eyes off Larry, she reached over and placed the object face up on the counter in front of the DMV employee. The employee, a woman with tired eyes who had been trying her best to look anywhere but at the confrontation unfolding just feet away, finally glanced down at the counter. As her eyes registered what lay there, a visible jolt went through her. Her posture straightened instantly, the weariness drained from her face, replaced first by confusion, then by a dawning realization, and finally, by something akin to stunned awe, tinged with a sudden, acute fear. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out and carefully picked up the card, bringing it closer to read the text printed upon it. She read it once, her eyes widening, then again, as if unable to fully process its meaning. Her gaze flickered from the card to Naomi, and then back to the card, a silent acknowledgement passing between the two women that shifted the dynamics of the entire room. The employee, moments ago a passive observer caught in an awkward public scene, was now visibly distressed, understanding the true weight of the situation. Naomi, seemingly unaffected by the employee's reaction, finally broke her silence. Her voice, when it came, was still measured, calm, and entirely devoid of the emotional turmoil Larry had tried to provoke. But now, it carried an undeniable weight, a gravitas that commanded attention in a way Larry's shouting never could. She addressed Larry directly, her gaze piercing through his sunglasses, through his uniform, right into the core of his being. "I am a federal investigator," Naomi stated, each word landing with quiet finality. "With the Department of Justice." Larry Denton visibly recoiled. The smug smirk that had been plastered on his face just moments before vanished as if wiped away by an invisible hand. His eyes, now visible behind the sunglasses which seemed to lose their opaque quality in his sudden shock, darted between Naomi, the DMV employee, and the card on the counter. His face, which had been flushed with arrogant confidence, paled slightly. The air went from thick with tension to thin with disbelief. He was momentarily speechless, a rare state for the loud officer. Then his survival instincts kicked in, coupled with a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling away from him. He forced a laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "A federal investigator?" he sputtered, waving a dismissive hand. "Come on. What is this, some kind of joke? You're just trying to pull rank, lady. This isn't federal business. I was just having a little fun. You're abusing your power here, acting like my boss or something." His voice was too loud again, a sign of his rising panic, but it lacked the earlier confidence. It was tinged with desperation, a hollow attempt to laugh off the revelation, to frame it as an overreaction, a misinterpretation, anything other than the undeniable truth staring him in the face. He puffed out his chest again, trying to recapture his earlier posture of authority, but the effect was ruined by the slight tremor in his hands. Naomi's calm action of presenting her federal identification was the precise, calculated strike she had been waiting for. It immediately dismantled Larry's assumption of her powerlessness and transformed the public spat into a high-stakes official encounter. The DMV employee's reaction served as irrefutable third-party verification of the card's authenticity and significance, highlighting the abrupt shift in the power dynamic. Larry's immediate shock and subsequent clumsy attempt to dismiss her authority as abusing power revealed his sudden fear and his desperate, failing effort to regain control by minimizing the situation and questioning her legitimacy, rather than addressing his own misconduct. The seemingly simple act of showing an ID card had just turned a minor Q dispute into a major federal incident, validating the puzzle piece of her quiet strength hinted at in Act 1. Would the word of a federal investigator be enough to dismantle the arrogance of a local officer secure in his perceived impunity, or would the officer's denial hold sway? The answer lay not just in identity, but in the undeniable proof of repeated wrongdoing. Naomi did not dignify Larry's sputtering accusations of abusing power with a verbal response. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke volumes, each deliberate movement a further step in the process she had initiated the moment Larry opened his mouth. Still maintaining her calm composure, She reached back into her clutch bag. This time, she withdrew not a single card, but a substantial file, thick with papers, possibly containing digital media as well. She placed the file on the counter with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. She opened it just enough for Larry and the wide-eyed DMV employee to glimpse the contents. There were photographs, perhaps grainy stills from security cameras, perhaps photos taken discreetly on cell phones. There were printed pages, typewritten reports, summaries of complaints. There were likely small USB drives or SD cards nestled amongst the documents, holding video and audio recordings. This wasn't just a collection of papers. This was the carefully compiled history of Larry Denton's misconduct. These were the complaints from the victims he had harassed, the reports detailing his excessive force, the visual evidence of his biased behavior, the recordings of his discriminatory language. This file represented patterns, not isolated incidents, a systematic abuse of his authority built over time. As Larry's eyes fell upon the contents of the file, his face underwent another rapid transformation. The defensive bluster drained away, replaced by a look of genuine, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted from the file to Naomi, to the watching crowd, searching desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. He knew instantly the weight of what lay before him. He had been compiled, documented, caught. He began to pace a small circle in front of the counter, running a hand through his short-cropped hair, his earlier arrogance completely dissolving into frantic energy. "No, no, no, you can't do this," he exclaimed, his voice rising to a near shriek. That's fabricated. You're setting me up. I want to call my supervisor. This is harassment." He was cornered, and his reaction was a desperate lashing out, accusations flying wildly, hoping to discredit Naomi and the evidence she presented. He gestured wildly at the file, then at Naomi, his face contorted with fear and rage. The physical manifestation of his unraveling was complete. The confident, powerful officer was gone, replaced by a man terrified of the consequences of his own actions. Naomi watched his display with a detached, almost clinical air. She allowed him his moment of panic, understanding that it was part of the process. When he paused for breath, still trembling with agitation, she made her next move. With the same measured calm she had displayed throughout, she took out her personal cell phone. The simplicity of the action was striking against the backdrop of his histrionics. She quickly navigated through her contacts, her finger moving efficiently across the screen. Larry, consumed by his own fear, didn't immediately grasp what she was doing. He was still focused on demanding to call his people, his backup, his chain of command, the people he thought could protect him. He didn't understand that Naomi operated on a different level, outside his protective bubble. Naomi found the contact she was looking for. She brought the phone to her ear for a second. Then, with a deliberate motion, she pulled it away and activated the speakerphone function. The clear, electronic sound of the phone dialing echoed in the sudden stillness that had fallen over the room once more. Everyone watched, listened, captivated. The ringing continued for a few moments, each ring amplifying the tension. Then, a voice answered. It was a deep, authoritative male voice, instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the local police department's hierarchy. The voice of the city's chief of police. Naomi spoke, her voice crisp, formal, and carrying the full weight of her federal authority. "This is Investigator Harris, Department of Justice," she stated. "I'm currently at the California Department of Motor Vehicles office." The chief's voice responded, professional and expectant. "Yes, Investigator Harris. What can I do for you?" "I need to report a situation involving one of your officers," Naomi continued, her gaze still fixed on the now paralyzed Larry Denton. "Officer Larry Denton. Case file Denton, Code 119B. We have compiled substantial evidence of repeated misconduct, including racial bias, excessive force, and abuse of authority, corroborated by multiple complaints and visual documentation." She paused for just a beat, letting the gravity of the statement sink in, both for the chief on the other end of the line and for the audience in the room. "Based on the evidence and his behavior here today, which I am witnessing firsthand, I am requesting his immediate suspension from duty." Larry gasped, a choked, desperate sound. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Naomi finished her instruction, her tone absolute. "Furthermore, I require Officer Denton to report to the Internal Affairs Division of your department within the next 24 hours for formal questioning related to these findings." The chief's response was immediate and decisive, without hesitation. "Understood, Investigator Harris. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will proceed with the immediate suspension and ensure Officer Denton reports as requested. Consider it done." "Thank you, Chief," Naomi replied. She ended the call and calmly lowered her phone. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. The echoing confirmation from the chief's voice seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Every single person in the DMV office was staring, wide-eyed, mouths slightly agape. Larry Denton stood frozen, utterly still, his face ashen. The panic from moments before seemed to have drained away, leaving behind a hollow shell. He looked as though he had turned to stone, all the fight and bluster completely extinguished. The mask of power and arrogance he had worn for so long had not just slipped, it had shattered on the floor around him. The eyes of the bystanders, which had followed the confrontation with a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity, now settled on Larry with a new expression, one of disbelief, relief, and a quiet, burgeoning sense of vindication. They had witnessed his abuse of power firsthand, perhaps even been victims of it themselves in the past, and now they were witnessing his abrupt, public downfall at the hands of the woman he had just tried to humiliate. The pieces of the puzzle had come together dramatically. The quiet woman was a federal agent. Her presence was not accidental, her silence was power, and the evidence was overwhelming. The tables had not just turned. They had been completely overturned. The security camera continued its silent, impartial recording from the corner of the ceiling. What is the final, tangible cost when authority is weaponized against the very people it is sworn to protect? It is more than just a career. It is the stripping away of a symbol, a public acknowledgement that trust has been irrevocably broken. After the chief of police's voice fell silent, confirming Larry Denton's immediate suspension, the heavy quiet in the DMV office persisted for a long moment. Larry stood like a statue carved from ash, his face devoid of color, his eyes wide and unseeing. The arrogant bluster, the furious panic, it had all drained away, leaving behind a raw, exposed vulnerability. He was no longer the imposing officer. He was just a man caught, judged, and found wanting. Slowly, agonizingly, life seemed to seep back into him, but it was not a return of strength, rather a collapse into pathetic despair. He stumbled forward a step, then another, his movements jerky and uncertain, until he stood just a few feet from Naomi Harris. His eyes, glassy and filled with a desperate, animal fear, fixed on her. His hands, which had moments ago been flailing in anger, now trembled visibly at his sides. "Please, Investigator Harris." His voice was a low croak, barely audible, a stark contrast to the booming aggression he had used earlier. He swallowed hard, trying to find air, trying to find words that could possibly undo the damage. I beg you, I have a family, a wife, kids." He gestured weakly, as if invoking images of suburban domesticity could somehow negate the casual cruelty he had dispensed minutes before. "I was just doing my job. We have to deal with difficult people every day. Sometimes you just lose your temper, you know? It's stress. The job is stressful." He trailed off, his excuses sounding hollow and pathetic even to himself. A desperate attempt to find a human connection, a plea for mercy from the woman he had just tried to dehumanize. He hunched his shoulders, making himself appear smaller, less threatening, attempting to elicit sympathy from the woman whose professional authority he had just mocked and whose personal dignity he had assaulted. Naomi looked at him, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, merely a quiet, unwavering certainty. She had heard countless excuses like this before, justifications for misconduct that always circled back to the pressures of the job, the difficult public, anything but the officer's own choices, his own biases, his own willingness to abuse his power. She did not see a man making a mistake. She saw a pattern of behavior, documented and confirmed. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, steady, and final. It carried no emotional weight, no anger, no pity, just the quiet, implacable force of principle. "You didn't just do your job, Officer Denton," Naomi said, her words cutting through his weak excuses like a laser. "You weaponized it. You took the authority and trust granted to you by the public and used it to belittle, intimidate, and discriminate against people based on your own prejudice." Her gaze did not waver. "That is not stress. That is not losing your temper. That is a fundamental betrayal of the oath you swore and the uniform you wear. The force of law has no place for individuals who use their position to harm the very people they are meant to protect." As she spoke, Naomi reached back into her clutch bag one last time. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, crisp and official. It was a standard form, a request for the immediate surrender of department property, including his badge and identification. It was a simple document, yet it held the immense weight of finality. She held the form out towards him. Larry looked at the paper, then up at Naomi. Then his eyes dropped to the shiny metal badge pinned squarely on the left side of his chest. The badge, the symbol, the very object that had seemed to radiate power just minutes ago. Now, under Naomi's unwavering gaze and the silent, watching eyes of the crowd, it felt heavy, cold, a burden rather than a source of strength. His hand, still trembling, rose slowly towards his chest. His fingers fumbled slightly with the pin clasp. The small, metallic sound as he worked the clasp was unnaturally loud in the pervasive silence of the room. He finally managed to detach it. For a moment, he held the badge in his trembling palm, staring at it as if he had never seen it before, as if it was a foreign object. The polished surface seemed to mock him, reflecting the sterile overhead lights and the ashen face of the man who had just lost everything it represented. Slowly, his shoulders slumped further. With a final, shuddering breath, he extended his hand towards Naomi, the badge resting in his open palm. The weight of the moment was immense, palpable throughout the room. The symbol of his corrupted authority was being surrendered to the quiet force of true justice. The badge, no longer a shield, no longer a weapon, lay inert, a silent witness to his fall. Larry's desperate plea, focusing on his family and minimizing his actions as mere stress or temper, highlights his complete lack of accountability and his inability to comprehend the systemic harm his prejudice caused. Naomi's response, firm and principle-based, directly refutes his excuses, clearly defining his actions not as failings, but as deliberate abuses of power that disqualify him from law enforcement. The act of presenting the surrender form and Larry's physical removal of the badge is the symbolic and tangible climax of his downfall. It represents the official termination of his authority, witnessed by the people he mistreated, solidifying the transfer of power from abusive authority to rightful oversight. The badge, once a symbol of perceived dominance, becomes a symbol of his lost privilege and the consequences of his actions. Naomi Harris turned from the counter, leaving the badge and the crumpled figure of Larry Denton behind her. Her task here was complete. She walked towards the exit doors, her steps steady and purposeful, but without any fanfare. There was no victorious strut, no triumphant glance back. Her demeanor remained one of quiet competence, the same calm presence that had defined her upon entering. She was not a superhero soaring away after saving the day. She was a professional, concluding her assignment. As she walked through the silent, watchful crowd, eyes followed her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and profound relief. Small, murmured thanks were exchanged among the bystanders, quiet nods of acknowledgement directed towards her retreating back. The oppressive atmosphere of the DMV seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Near the exit, a young black girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, stood holding her mother's hand. Her hair was styled in neat braids, and her eyes, wide and bright, were fixed on Naomi. As Naomi approached, the little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, her voice full of innocent wonder, "Mommy, is she a superhero?" Naomi, her hearing surprisingly sharp, caught the question. She paused just before reaching the doors. She turned towards the little girl and her mother. For the first time since she had entered the DMV, a genuine, soft smile touched Naomi's lips. It was a warm smile, gentle and kind, a stark contrast to the sharp intensity of her earlier focus. She knelt down, lowering herself to the little girl's eye level. The girl looked at her with wide, expectant eyes. "Not a superhero, sweetheart," Naomi said softly, her voice warm and clear. "Just someone doing what's right." She gave the girl a gentle, reassuring smile, nodded briefly to the mother, and then stood up and continued her walk towards the doors. The automatic doors slid open, letting in the bright Californian sunshine and a breath of fresh air, and Naomi Harris stepped out, leaving the sterile confines of the DMV and the wreckage of Larry Denton's career behind her. Her words to the little girl resonated far beyond that simple exchange. They carried the weight of the story that had just unfolded. Justice isn't always about extraordinary powers or impossible feats performed by caped figures. Often, it is found in the quiet courage of ordinary people, or those who operate with extraordinary integrity and purpose in seemingly ordinary roles, choosing to stand against injustice, to speak truth to power, to do the hard, necessary work of upholding principles even when it's difficult or dangerous. Naomi's victory wasn't just over one racist officer. It was a small, significant triumph against the larger, systemic issue of prejudice and abuse of power. It was a reminder that overcoming adversity isn't always a single, dramatic battle, but a series of choices, moments of quiet strength, and the unwavering commitment to doing what is right, planting seeds of hope in unexpected places. The story of Naomi Harris is a testament to the power of integrity, the importance of standing firm against prejudice, and the quiet strength found in simply doing what is right. It's one piece of a much larger tapestry of human experience, filled with challenges, moments of courage, and the ongoing pursuit of justice. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the tension, the frustration, and ultimately the relief and inspiration of this encounter, then your journey with us is just beginning. We have countless more stories waiting to be told, more layers of the human condition to explore, more moments of truth to unveil. Don't miss out on the next chapter in our narrative journey. Please like this video, share it with others who need to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel to join our community. Hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when the next powerful story arrives. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing another compelling narrative with you very soon.